Hello, BookTube. I'm coming to you from a slightly different location here. And as you can see, I have a guest. Jason Harrigan not only runs the wonderful BookTube channel Byways and Bookland, but is also in IRL, in real life. He is an antiquarian book dealer, as you've seen if you watched his channel, which is perilously close to 1,000 subscribers. Thinking we can cross that Terminator line if we want to. And Jason has agreed to be on the channel to talk about the world of old and rare book dealing and book collecting. So welcome, Jason. And I'd love to start off by, in the way of a proper comic book, by asking about your origin story. How did you get into used and rare book dealing?
Okay, I probably didn't have a traditional route that a lot of younger people, when they get into rare book dealing, would go and serve an apprenticeship with a shop, for example, like the Brattle, and work on the third floor, and just learn the kind of ins and outs of the business that way. I started as a book collector, and I determined early on that I didn't have a huge disposable income, but what I had was a good enough eye for books. So I started as almost like a pocketbook dealer to fund my own collection. I would buy a book,
okay,
and sell it to upgrade them.
Where did that eye come from? The eye for books?
From being a book collector. I often say I've handled hundreds of thousands of books, and that's not an exaggeration. Many, many hundreds of thousands of books. And there's that old word, connoisseurship, that you just get a sense of something. So I could walk into a room or a library or an institutional library, and I'm scanning the shelves, and what I'm looking for is what I haven't seen before.
Okay. So one of your earliest yardsticks was, have I ever seen this before?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And the intuition from that is that if I haven't, maybe it's because it's rare rather than because I don't get out enough. That's the idea.
Yeah.
So you, at some point early on in your life as a reader, the path that everybody on BookTube knows, which is reading books, loving them, maybe setting some aside for your personal collection. At some point in your early development as a reader, that path developed a parallel path of also assessing them as objects.
Absolutely.
When was that? So you're saying that divergence happened before you had the capital or the name recognition to actually fund it?
That's it. I would say about 20. So about 30 years ago now. And we're talking pre-internet, so you had to physically visit bookshops, and I would book like cheap flights from Ireland to go to the UK weeks in advance, and I would have books. Just to hunt for books, and I would have one day get in there at like 9:45 into Heathrow, get into town, and have like maybe 6-7 hours of concentrated book hunting, and then back out to the plane and home. And what developed is you just saw so many books, and then you educated yourself. And if you're an interested reader, like from a reader, if you're interested in reading science fiction or history, you get name recognition. You understand that this author writes this kind of stuff and is rated, of desirability within that genre. And it's transferring those things to books. Now, I'm lucky that I have a fairly good memory, and I think that's a useful tool. I don't even today, I don't rely on, nowadays you can get all kinds of apps on your phones. You've seen them at library sales, I'm sure, these guys who scan every book, and they're looking for what they can make a penny on Amazon with, I would never use something like that because I just have so much information stored up in my head. Now, I do use resources, bibliographies and things like that to educate myself. So one of the first things I'd done, and a piece of advice I got quite early on, was, kind of buy the book before you buy the book. And what I mean by that is buy the resources you need to learn. So bibliographies, books about the history of books, about how books were made. So a kind of a library of books on books. And the better educated you are, the luckier you are when you go hunting,
And
you know, and it's not luck at all.
you say that in those early years you got good pieces of advice
From book dealers.
from book dealers.
Yeah.
What was that process? There had to come a point where they realized that you weren't a dilettante anymore, that you were actually serious about this. They have a sense for recognizing that?
Yeah, I think it was because I was inadvertently a book scout before I knew what a book scout was. So I would find, so say for example, take for example, I'm in Ireland and I find a book on early English hunting come up at an auction with nice plates, and I go to RV Tooley's English books with plates, and I understand that all the plates are in there and it's a desirable book, but it's in Ireland. And this is again before the internet. So the next time I go to the UK, that comes with me in a bag. And I go to a dealer in London who I know specializes in natural history or sporting pastimes. And I say, here's this book. I'd like to sell it. And I'm going to get the most money for that book from that dealer.
And
without me having a
How
customer
did you
base.
come to know those dealers?
By physically visiting hundreds and hundreds of bookshops, special collections libraries, private libraries at home. I wrote letters. I wrote letter after letter. I introduced myself as a collector who was interested in, if I was in Boston, I would have wrote to the Boston Athenaeum. I would have written to the Harvard libraries, all the special collection curators. I know some of the special collection curators in the Massachusetts system broadly, in Harvard as well. And I would introduce myself and say, you've got fabulous books. I'm really interested and I'd like to come and see them, please. And that's what I've done.
And most of them are amenable to that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely amenable. You get the odd curmudgeon, but like most people, look at BookTube. What do we like to talk about?
Oh, I thought for a minute you were going to say, look at BookTube when you were referencing odd curmudgeons.
No.
So I guess we both dodged a bullet with that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And somewhere out there in the world, Mark Richardson is saying, did someone say curmudgeon? He's got us both beat.
Todd is scratching his ear.
Yes,
but,
yes. So someone's talking about curmudgeon somewhere. So we're still in early days.
Early
There
days.
had to be a point when this process, you say you were a book scout before you knew what it was. You start to talk to dealers. You start to bring items that your reading and instinct are telling you are valuable to a dealer to see if they will agree in the best possible way by buying it. At some point in those early years, you had to reach a critical mass, right? Where suddenly you realize this doesn't need to stay a hobby. This could become a profession. Right?
Absolutely.
That had to happen at some point.
It did. And anyone who's watched my channel has probably heard me reference the fact that I went back to university later in life, aged about 30, 31. I didn't have the opportunity. We don't need to go into that after I left school. So I felt a lacking, and this is just my Irish insecurity, because I didn't have a higher educational background. There was still at a certain level of dealing, there's still a minimum requirement. There's kind of things you have to check off the list. Yeah, that's just the way of the world, I think. And so I was working very hard doing my job, but I was making more money on a weekend dealing in books.
No kidding. Yeah. But I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are going to be listening to it because they'll be wondering if this is something they could pursue. So could you talk a little bit more about what you just mentioned? What are those non-buy your own bootstraps requirements? Is a university course necessary to do this?
No, it doesn't. It does you no harm. Like one of the exciting things in the rare book world today is the amount of young people in it. The perception always was that it was an older person's pastime because they had the disposable income to buy. So when I'm talking about rare books here, I'm talking about books that are going to be kind of 4-figure and up, because there's no point going around me trying to deal a book for €50. There's no gain or profit in it. As an individual, if you have a bookshop and like the Brattlin, you can sell 1,000 of those a week at €50. That's a different model. But education, I think, is key. And I think there's great programs now. There's great programs run for people who are interested in becoming book dealers that weren't there even when I was doing it. In the United States, you have the Colorado, the ILAB, which is the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers. They run a kind of seminar, a training seminar in Colorado that you can just apply to go to. And it's hosted, and the speakers and educators at it are all people in the rare book business. And they freely give, they do freely sometimes, because you can apply for a scholarship. If you're young and you're interested, you can write to some of the big book dealers. They sponsor travel and accommodation to these seminars. I know it's in Colorado most years. And in the UK, there's a similar thing in York, happens every year. But yeah, education is important. And I done it the very long, arduous, difficult way, Steve, by wearing out shoe leather and petrol and cars and tires, traipsing across Europe, across Ireland, across England, Scotland,
Amazing.
Wales, and going on extended book trips. Nowadays, you can do a course in special librarianship or in rare books as part of a university degree in, say, the arts or humanities. And that can open the door then to going into becoming a dealer.
Now,
but really,
in those early years of traveling all over,
yeah.
Were there gaffes? Were there mistakes that still bug you?
Oh, I remember being about 100 miles from the ferry I had to catch with maybe £2 worth of petrol in the car and a boot full of books I hadn't sold.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was nowhere near a shop that I thought would actually buy some. And I kind of parked up and thought about it. And there was a large town, Stockport in Wales. And I just headed into the centre of town, and it was about 4 o'clock in the evening, and I had to catch a ferry at 8 o'clock that night. And I had literally, my entire budget was spent. I had maybe £2 or £3 in my pocket. I had not enough petrol to get the heavy laden car back to the ferry. And I literally walked around with an armful of books I thought were good sellers, and found a shop and sold like £50 worth of books and got home safely. But I've bought duds. I mean, I've bought books that I thought were good and I expected were good, and they turn out I didn't collate them properly at the moment, so I didn't check that all the pages, for example, were in there. A plate had been sliced out or something. And of course, drastically reduces the desirability of the book.
This is the thing that people zero in on, I imagine, is details like that.
Yeah. In the rare book world, really, what you're looking for, there's a couple of key things you need to keep in mind when you're looking at any book in any genre. The first one's going to be desirability. It doesn't matter how rare a book is. You know, if I have a book here and it's like the only one in the world, here's a book that's unique. It's the only one in the world because it's a manuscript book. But if nobody else in the world wants that, what's it worth?
Right.
So desirability has to be there, and then comes condition. Age is only important from the point of view from a book qualifying as antiquarian. It has to be kind of 100 years old. But even these days, a lot of traditional antiquarian book dealers are selling much more recent material because the market has changed. People have gone for visual items and books as objects and prints and artworks because we live in smaller spaces. So we live now in apartments and condominiums and one up, one downs, and we don't have rooms to dedicate to a library. For people who want something nice, they might have a section of books, but then they'll want maybe a nice map or a framed print or something that speaks to their collector thing. So the market's kind of changed from that kind of point of view of what people are interested in. But,
now, are there avenues to approach? You mentioned you have a book there. It's a bound manuscript.
Yeah.
One of a kind, but if no one's interested in it, then it's of no value to an antiquarian dealer. But are there avenues to find the one person in the world who will pay anything for that one book? They have to be out there, right? That you say desirability is a key factor.
Yeah, it's it's down to the dealer to make an item desirable. You know,
Ah,
yeah, that's the skill. You know, it is a sales job at the end of the day, and you have to be able to place things in their context, which where the education comes in. You know, you have to be. So I took the liberty. Here's two. I use these kind of buff folders, very plain, very boring. And for example, this one here, and if I open it, you'll just see it's just a folder that's falling apart, a binder. But this is 1946 by Smith, and this is the development of the atomic program from 1940 to 1946 in the US. This is the official military report, typed up with corrections, with illustrations, with all the technical data, all the formulas that they were using pre-World War I to use nuclear power for military means, which of course is Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
right.
So the document is a sterile scientific treatise. But what it is original source material
Yes.
for one of the major, you know, acts of war that happened in the last, millennia, the bombing. So really the idea is when you find material, you have to be able to A, identify that it's interesting, and then B, identify who would be interested in it.
Right.
That comes down to building relationships with, like I say, with curators of special collections, with librarians, with individual and institutional buyers, with other dealers who maybe are more specialist in that area than you are. And then you could work on a kind of consignment basis. The hardest thing to do is build up a core of clients, you know.
That must take time. That took time for you.
It takes time. Yeah, I have my clients, and I rarely am looking for new clients because I'm kept busy enough looking after the wants and needs of the clients I've built up already. Because I determined early on to stay small. It's just me, you know. I don't have a staff. I'd happily take on someone and teach them the ropes. I haven't got down to that yet, you know. But yeah.
But for a case of like that typewritten document in that folder that you just showed, what aspect, when you come across something like that, what aspect of historical responsibility comes in, if any? If you encounter something like that pulled out of, let's say, a stack of stuff that no one was paying any attention to, and you can see right away that, as you say, it's a primary source.
Yeah.
Is it where in the calculus is the idea that this should be publicly available?
Okay, well, what you're talking about then are kind of ethics in book dealing.
Sure, the ethics of your profession.
The ethics of book dealing, like anything like that, especially when you're dealing with items sometimes of historical and cultural significance, are really important. So over the past 30 years, in some instances, I would have donated material to public institutions, National Library in Ireland, for example, and other places,
right,
that I thought was significant enough. I didn't want to put it on the marketplace. Other times I would give offer of first refusal to maybe an institution or a collection who I thought would benefit from having it. So I would give them the time to think about it, to view the material, and to decide if it's something they wanted to purchase. Because at the end of the day, it's business too.
It's business.
You know?
Okay.
But I would give primacy of kind of opportunity to purchase to parties where it's a natural fit.
Okay.
And
but
sometimes they don't.
The ethics of your profession don't require you to just hand it over.
No.
It's a business transaction, even if this
is a business.
Okay.
Yeah. You may give favorable rates or pricing or something like that. But really, I would never rush to market just because I found something interesting. I'm a very slow dealer.
You are.
I'm working on things that I've picked up maybe 5 years ago are still not yet fully worked through by me as to how I want to get rid of them. And that's the collector in me too. I like having that stuff. I don't share a lot of it on BookTube because it's too much of a crossover, Steve. You know, my BookTube channel is me talking about the books I collect and I read.
Right.
Some of which are rare, some of which are expensive, but I don't want to muddy. I don't mind this because it's kind of a third party thing we're doing, but I don't want to muddy my channel
I understand completely. I face the same problem when it comes to talking in critical detail about a new release.
Yeah.
It slops right over into what I do for a living,
For
and
your paper.
that's tricky to narrate. That's,
Yeah.
but people who watch your channel who've seen these things have noticed, I'm sure. And I should point out once again that the number of people who watch your channel is distressingly very close to 1,000. Once again, we might want to change that. but the people who've watched your channel have noticed that it's not just books. There's ephemera too.
Yeah.
There's your infamous desk cannon that you make sure to point out in every video where you show it is fully functional.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, absolutely. It works.
But there's lots of other stuff too, right? Stamps and ephemera of one kind or another. At what point did your pursuit of antiquarian books start to branch out to that kind of thing?
I've always been a bit of a magpie, so I've always enjoyed bright, shiny things and go, ooh, that's interesting. And what goes hand in hand with book collectors, so I would have visited private collections where I would have been offered to come and purchase material, say the passing of a collector, or they're just downsizing or changing their focus. And because I take everything in, I'm kind of eidectic in that sense. I walk into the room and I read the room, not the people. I read the books and objects. And often I'll see something and I'll go, that book's really great, but that looks really interesting too. And if it's up for grabs, I'll have a go at it and I'll try and buy it. So I end up with all kinds of bits of.
Is that somewhat common among other book dealers that you know, that they are also magpies, that they will have ephemera?
No, I know book dealers who wouldn't read the newspaper. They would never read a book. It's purely a commercial activity. Generally, it's inherited. Generally, that's where you have maybe a second or third generation, where granddad was a real bookman or grandma was a real bookwoman and built up a huge client base and a huge store of goodwill. And then, like a lot of intergenerational companies, by the time you get down to the second iteration of it, they could care less about books. It's just a paycheck. And so, yeah, I know book dealers who would proudly say, I don't read any of this stuff.
Oh my.
Yeah, so it doesn't correlate that a book dealer would be a book lover, you know? Yeah.
Now, I want to get back to something that you mentioned. You mentioned that in your book buying years, there have been duds.
Yes.
And I know that everybody who's watching this is going to be.
You want my biggest loss, is it? My biggest gain.
They're going to want to know, what about not the duds, but the fakes?
Yes.
Because you've mentioned that sharks are in the water, right? You've mentioned there are people out there who want to test their ability to fake.
Okay, so it's a problem within, like any collectibles field, it's a problem in the books. You rarely encounter an entire book that's been faked because it's such an expensive process. You do find what are called sophisticated copies in the business. So that's a copy where maybe someone has changed out the frontispiece or the title page from an earlier edition and kind of seamlessly worked it in to make it look a bit better than the book actually is. The most common thing that's faked nowadays are dedications and signatures by authors.
Be the easiest.
And believe it or not, in modern, what are called hyper-modern, I don't deal in kind of modern books per se, but modern books where the dust jackets are really important. The dust jackets are now being faked to be pristine.
Dust jackets of older books?
Books from the 1990s, 2000s. They're being run off on high copy because for what's called hyper modern first editions. So like a Thomas Pynchon or any recent big name author, Cormac McCarthy's first edition of The Road, a book I know you personally love. If the dust jacket is a bit battered or is clipped or creased, that drastically reduces the value of the book because modern books are an object. It has to be as nice as it can be. So there's fake dust jackets. There's a whole, you can go online and find any number of businesses that will sell you any dust jacket you want
Really?
to dress up your book and make it
I
look
would
good.
assume that the dust jackets that came originally from the original publisher would have some sort of watermark that could not be.
No, just glossy paper usually.
Really?
Yeah.
So,
They do get things wrong. They do miss points. So one of the things with modern editions or first editions is every book generally has points. If you kind of use a book, here's a book on first edition prices and stuff. It's an old one, but it doesn't matter. It tells you what's rare. What was rare 10 years ago is still rare today. There will be, the price might be in US and Canadian dollars on the first edition, first printing, and only in US dollars on the first printing, first edition, second. So if the forger,
that's the kind of stuff you're talking about when you talk about your recall. Those are the kinds of things that they will serve you in beautiful stead if you have a mental recall of a million of those kinds of details when you're looking at a book lot.
Yes, exactly.
Without needing to go back home and check your resources.
And talking about forgeries, my knowledge in that stuff has saved me as much money as it has made me money.
Oh.
It saved me from spending money where I would have lost as much as I've spent money and made a gain. Because I got the sense something just wasn't right.
And your sense turned out to be right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
most of the time I'm pretty right. Yeah.
Two more questions on fakes. I'm sure that people are going to be interested in this aspect of it. Number one, it's got to be a small coterie of people who make fakes. That can't be a growth industry.
Who make them well, it is.
What happens to them?
So
it's actually a crime, right? It's caveat emptor. It's not actually a crime to foist a fake on the market, is it?
Well, that's a grey area, I think, depending on what country you're in. Forgery falls under different laws in different places. There's different attitudes, shall we say.
Forgery. Okay.
Forgery. So take the case of the most common types of forgeries now are signatures. A nice Charles Dickens to one of his contemporaries, dedication in a book, okay? Convincingly in the world to be able to do one that would convince everyone that it was real, there's probably only half a dozen people with the skill set, with the chutzpah and the ability to take a pen for a one-time hit on a book and get the tone of the message right, get the spelling correct.
No do-overs.
Yeah, no do-overs, get the flow of the ink, no hesitation, unless the author was known for hesitating. Get the slope, the angle, the thickness of the letters, get all that right in one go. There's very few people can do it.
But
and the truth is, we don't know who they are because they're too good.
Really?
The best forgers in history are unknown,
Because of how good they were.
Yeah. So there's recent forgers like in the States, Mark Hoffman, for example, in Utah, who faked a lot of Mormon documents and letters and stuff. And he's serving time in jail now for murder. But he was good, but then he got sloppy because he got angry and became emotionally involved in a battle with the church, if you like. So he got sloppy and got caught. But
it's not quite
at another level, Steve, at another level, just to pad out what I was saying about there's probably maybe a dozen really good forgers active in the world globally at any time. There are now forgery machines in every country of the world, factories set up where they turn out modern first editions. They will buy 500, say, John Grisham has a new book out, or someone who's like, I'm terrible on contemporary authors, some big name author, whoever wins the Booker this year, right? Well, there's already forgers have been buying up stocks of the long list Booker nominees. So Hilary Mantel's book, for example, and they will have their people sitting by with pen in hand, ready to do signatures that they will then sell on platforms like eBay and stuff like that. And they'll take a $20 book and they'll turn it into a $50 book by just having someone possibly do, as an author would at a signing, with a Sharpie or with a biro, just strike through the author's name. That's the convention authors use. They'll strike through their printed name and just put their name underneath. and not dedicated to Jason or to Steve, because
Right.
that reduces its value. And mark my words, if you anyone who's watching could do this. If you look the night before the booker and see how many signed copies are available of a book, and then do the same search the very next day on eBay for the same copies, there will be hundreds more. Because in America and in Canada and in England, there's little rings of people who will sit there with their piles bought from Easons and Waterstones and Borders of their hardbacks ready to sign the winners.
Industry.
So
a little industry.
It's a cottage. Yeah. The gold standard really for modern books that are signed is that, like I have Umberto Eco books signed in my own collection because I met him and got him signed and have photographs of me with him signing. But even now, you can buy fake tickets to signing events, say, for example, for Stephen King, who does less and less of them. You can now buy batches of fake tickets to put in the book to say that you were at the signing event in Maine or whatever that he done in the last November. And they scan the ticket and just print up fake tickets. So there'll be 50,000 people going to a Stephen King signing, given the amount of books that are out there, you know.
Oh.
I'm sorry to disillusion all the collectors.
My second question about fakes is inevitably going to be less interesting than that. Who knew there was a whole world like that connected? My second question about fakes is, in the history of antiquarian book collecting, are there any fakes that have achieved value on their own? Where the fact that they are revealed as a fake doesn't automatically just remove them from the conversation.
Well,
are there any fakes that you would like to own?
They're highly collected. Thomas J. Wise famously faked all kinds of wonderful 19th century pamphlets on original presses with original typeface. He was uncovered by Carter. I showed John Carter's book here, the ABC for Booklaters, Carter and Pollard. But his works are now collected as fakes. Same for Thomas Chatterton. His works are collected as fakes. William Henry Ireland, his works are now collected.
Those must be intensely collectible.
So people build collections of fakes and forgeries. Yeah, because they're bibliographically interesting, you know. Yeah.
And now you say that the best forgers in the world are unknown. That good?
That would be my contention. When it comes to letters and signed dedications and stuff, I think some of the best forgers are the ones we'll never catch.
So that naturally brings me to a question I've asked you before, which is, how certain are you that you have fakes in your collection right now? Or even worse, what is the likelihood that you have trafficked in a fake without knowing it and without your buyer knowing it?
Okay, at the risk of like losing my business, I would have to say, I don't think any dealer who's been honest, and this is where ethics come back into it, so I'll back this up with my point, can say hand on heart that they haven't ever dealt in something unknowingly to themselves that was doctored or somehow altered. And in that scenario, the only thing you can do as an ethical dealer is to give, as I do, a lifetime guarantee to any purchaser that if they have any doubt or can show that what you sold is not what it claimed to be, you repurchase that without question. You make all the full financial reparations, etc., etc., and you then destroy that object. You then take that object out of circulation. So that's the only backstop you can have. I would never claim to be. There's a few niche areas I've probably seen everything that's been printed in, and I would know.
Right. I would assume that there would be some areas where your effective doubt would be zero.
Yeah. So people will come to me and say, would you have a look at this? Because they might have a doubt. And generally, on certain things, I would be able to give them, I'm very happy that that's okay. Or, you might be right. And if I'm saying, you might be right, best not to sell it.
Because in those niche areas, if you say, you might want to hold off, you have seen so much of those areas that you won't need to back that reaction up by saying, here, I'll get you these 3 books. that would be good enough. Because, right?
That's it. Yeah. That's it. It's just your opinion. Yeah, just your opinion. I mean, I can give a written report on stuff if people want, but I'm gonna charge you by the hour for that kind of. But within dealers, or even sometimes collectors have approached me and said, "What do you think of this?" And an item is coming up at an auction. And auction houses are a very interesting legal situation in that they'll happily sell a forgery even if they've been advised it is so, because they're agents. They have no skin in the game except the commission from the buyer and the seller.
Yes.
So they stand over nothing. I don't care how fancy they are. They stand over nothing that they sell, you know?
Yes.
And there's no good bringing it back to the auction house.
No.
They'll revert you back to the consignor.
No, that was the big detail with the Hitler diaries.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah,
we are not involved.
Yeah.
You get a historian who pops up in the audience and says, "That's obviously fake." Doesn't matter to us.
Like, no. 1.2 million.
So over time, you have developed elaborate instincts, not just for your little niche, for niches of extreme speciality, but for everything. You say you can walk into a room and say, "This will be of interest," and you'll often be right.
Generally, yes, yeah. Like I wouldn't like to claim I'm specialist beyond what I am confident in being specialist in. That's kind of a slightly different category. So there's about half a dozen areas over the years that I've really zoomed in on, and I've made it my business to become at least on a par with anyone else I can find who is interested in the same material. But just again, Steve, from attending numerous auctions, from visiting, when I go, say for example, you're a new customer to me. Steve Donoghue rings me up and says, "I want to build a collection of 17th century hand-colored erotica," okay, which is something I used to deal in, okay?
I don't see how my collection could get any bigger.
But when I would come to visit you, I would, you know, if it's a serious collector or even starting out, the first thing I'm doing is looking at what you don't have. I'm less interested in what you have. I'm more interested in what you don't have.
Right.
Because that's the avenue for growth. That's the avenue to suggest items to add to a collection or to enhance a collection. So my default position when I walk into any room of books is to take everything in and like store it and go, they have this, and this. And then I'm done with that.
Right. Right.
But if you have something I haven't seen before, that will jump out like a 5-bell alarm, and I'll go, "Oh, tell me more about this object here," you know. So
okay,
that's just experience.
Your hypothetical was, here's the advice that you would give to someone who's looking to start.
Yeah.
And that brings me perfectly to the subject I want to close with.
Yeah.
Because there have to be people watching who are thinking, I love books, I love reading, I'm passionate about my authors and my themes, but I'm also interested in collecting. And I have no idea how to start. I have no idea what to do or what I need or what I don't need. If you were approached by such a person, what are the basic pieces of advice
for collecting,
for how to do it, for how to start?
Okay, so I pulled a few things out here because I thought we might talk a bit like this. There's some basic resources I would recommend anyone who's going to collect in any field. And by collecting, I mean not just going to your local regular bookseller, but you're going to engage with specialist booksellers or go to auctions or go to antiquarian used bookshops. You need to understand the jargon, first of all. And for something like that, like this is the ABC of book collecting by John Carter, who we talked about in relation to Thomas White, an invaluable guide. He also has a great book, Taste and Technique in Book Collecting. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that yourself. And when it comes to describing books, there's a language, there's an argot or a jargon that booksellers use, and they use it right around the world.
Right.
And it's standard bibliography. And for that, you need to be really familiar with Morrow's work on bibliography. I think these are mirror to you. This is Ronald B. or McCarroll, his work on bibliography. And more importantly, Esdel's Manual of Bibliography.
How readily available are these to newcomers?
These are easy to find online. If you go on to 8 books or something, you'll find them. And these are my Look, that's an ex-library. I see there my working copy. It's not for sale. It's my actual tools of the trade. So yeah, I would familiar yourself with language.
Learn the language. Okay, yeah. And then what from there?
Spend $1. The most important thing I would say is to decide what you want to collect. Tell yourself at the outset, that you're not collecting for financial gain. You know, collect what you love and you'll never lose. Collect what interests you, and it's your collection. And that can be anything. I've seen fabulous collections on the most niche, esoteric items, things, places, and they are wonderful. They're repositories of all the knowledge on that subject on sometimes one bookshelf. And that's an amazing thing for a collector to do. And then I would say, even in this internet age where people go to anonymous online sellers, I would start locally and find your way to getting to know a couple of booksellers and introduce yourself. They're in business. They're going to be happy to engage with you. They're going to be happy to have a couple of discussions before even buying a book off them becomes an issue. And if I would suggest you, if the first thing they do is push a book on you, maybe go look for another book deal.
Find someone else, right?
Yeah. So, because it's the kind of industry or the business to be business about it. And it is a business. If someone wants to get into book selling, for example, as a career, the first thing you have to learn is that it's a business. This is how you make your money.
Right.
So you need to understand cash flow and profit margins and all those overheads and your taxes, etc. But really reach out and ask people questions, and you will find, I think, a very warm response anywhere you are in the world from the rare book business. And there's a lot of young people in it. A lot of curators now are very young people in their 20s and 30s. There's a whole raft of, very good dealers, more visible and experienced than me in their 20s and 30s, doing very exciting things in the rare book world. So
would you advise?
Just go look at it.
Start with a niche. Start with something small that interests you and cover that, learn that.
The old advice still stands.
The Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
Who wants to collect in the Napoleonic Wars? That's an ocean.
If you're going to collect Napoleonic Wars, I'd pick maybe one battle,
Right. Well, something very small. Right. I had a friend who pamphlets published in 19th century Iowa.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Exactly.
That gave her sea legs. It gave her the feeling, after a while, okay, I'm starting to know this subject.
Yeah.
It's not so overwhelming anymore.
No. You'll be guided by your passion. You'll be guided by what you love. If you absolutely have to have the book, that's what you should be collecting. And the other thing is, buy the best copy you can afford. That doesn't have to be the most expensive copy available. But there's nothing worse than buying a kind of it will do copy, because it would be better to have a shelf of 10 really nice quality, interesting, good books on a subject than 100 battered, beaten up with pages missing books. As a book collector, as you mature as a book collector, and I'm not talking here in age, I'm talking experience as you mature as a book collector. I know some phenomenal collectors who even by their early 20s were building really, really good, really solid collections. And we see some of that even on BookTube. I know some booktubers who are a lot younger than me, but I can see them developing their tastes and stuff. Buy the best you can afford.
Can't you? The people where any copy that I got at the thrift shop is fine because I'm going to read it to pieces anyway.
Yeah.
Versus the kind of people where I want the copy to be in good shape because it's going in my library.
It's going in my library. Yeah, it's a mental flip, really. The line between reader and collector is fairly thin. It's fairly thin. It's easy to fall into the thing. I think if your connection with books is a very ephemeral item at the best of times. But I just love books. I love reading and I love physical objects. But more than me having books myself, I love putting the book in the hand of a person who wants it more than I do. That's the best. That's the ultimate sale. You know, it's nice to make money, and I do. It's nice to make it my career, and I have. But what's really nice is where,
clients that you have.
yeah, where I can go to a client and
that
say,
thing that's going to bring a smile to their face.
yeah, here's this thing you've looked for 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. Here it is, and you can afford it, and it's yours. And that's just, that's the payment, really. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Well, I'm very grateful for the conversation. I mean, you are a rare book dealer who happens to be on BookTube. That's wonderful.
It's entirely your pleasure. There's Frida.
She's returned. I don't have any say over where she goes and when she goes. But I want to thank you. I want to have more conversations with you.
Yeah.
On many different subjects. But this was great to start with. I can't thank you enough. So I'm gonna wrap this conversation up.
Okay.
And we'll be talking again.
We will, and thanks for having me on your enormously popular channel.
Well, yours could stand to get into that 4-digit realm. I'm hoping that happens this week.
We'll see. I'll bore everyone to death. Goodbye, BookTube.
Goodbye, BookTube.